I rise today flabbergasted by the news that has just been made public. The government has finally revealed its true deficit number. Remember, this finance minister, this outgoing and now former finance minister, told the world that she was putting in place guardrails to limit the damage that her deficits could do. Her deficit plan was $40 billion, a mind-bogglingly large number that was already contributing to rekindling inflation again. This $40 billion was too big. It was out of control as it was. But at least to her credit, she said no more than that. And she decided she would have a guardrail. We know a guardrail is meant to stop vehicles from flying off cliffs. Well, as she was trying throughout the year to avoid going off the cliff, there were two people on the bus who had other ideas. The Prime Minister and carbon tax Carney. And the two of them went to the front of the bus, they grabbed the wheel, they pulled it sharply to the left, smashing into that guardrail, and she tried to resist. So they pulled even further to the left, and they stepped on the gas. The bus flew off the cliff, and now Canadians are at the bottom of the ravine in a big pile of debt. But instead of taking responsibility, the Prime Minister told her that she should take all the blame. That when the ambulances and the police cruisers arrived and the fire department, that she take the blame for running the bus off the cliff, and that carbon tax Carney and the Prime Minister could innocently sit back, and that the Prime Minister could then put carbon tax Carney in charge of driving the next bus. The good old boys in the back room would protect themselves and make the Finance Minister, the then Finance Minister, take all the blame. Reminds you of the way they treated the former Attorney General, a brilliant and brave First Nations woman who refused to kowtow to corruption. It reminds us of the way they treated Jane Philpott and so many other brave women who have dared question this self-described feminist Prime Minister. Some feminist indeed, throwing the bus off the cliff and throwing women under the bus. That is his real record. That his real record on finance, Mr. Speaker, is yet another $62 billion deficit. For context, outside of this government, there is no government in the history of Canada that has ever run a $62 billion deficit. Not even in the 90s when the Wall Street Journal said that we were a third world basket case. Not even during the massive global economic crisis did the deficit come anywhere close to that. And here we are, with the global economy growing, with the American economy booming in stable times. This deficit is 100% at the feet of this irresponsible Prime Minister and his personal economic advisor, carbon tax Carney. That's right. Now, Carney says he doesn't even want the job of Finance Minister. He doesn't even want to try and drive the crashed out bus after he helped run it off the cliff. And they couldn't find anyone all day. In fact, no one will appear today even to defend this incredible disaster of a budget. Look at the consequences in human terms, Mr. Speaker. We have 1,400 homeless camps in Ontario, 35 homeless encampments in Halifax alone. We have 2 million people lined up at food banks. Scurvy is making a comeback. The government admits that 1 in 4 children are going to school hungry every single day. Unemployment is rising, and according to this budget, expected to exceed 7% by the end of next calendar year. The gap between per capita GDP in Canada and the US is now 30,000 in Canadian dollars, 30,000 it was equal 10 years ago. This is the worst gap since at least the Second World War, and some say the worst gap in a century. Canadian workers are only getting 55 cents of investment for every dollar an American worker gets. $500 billion Canadian investment dollars, which works out to almost a quarter of our economy, has left net to go to the United States, where it builds pipelines, factories, warehouses, pipelines, business centers, Canadian investment dollars paying American wages, while our workers go starving for investment and for salaries to pay their bills. When I travel across this country, I consistently meet two types of people. One, those who are a little better off and tell me that, and I'll be very blunt about this, that if I don't win, they will leave the country. And they are very numerous. Yes. But you know, I don't worry about them as much. You know who I worry about? The ones who can't leave. The ones who don't know, and if I can just use very blunt language, who tell me, I don't know what the hell I'm going to do. I have no idea how I'm going to pay my way. That's right. I met a waitress at a restaurant not long ago, and she came up to me and she grabbed me by the hand and she said, "You have to win." And I said, "Oh, thank you, I appreciate your support." She said, no, it wasn't a compliment. "You have to win." And then she told me her story. She told me that she was working one full-time job and two part-time jobs just to pay her bills. As a single woman in her late 50s. And she was tired of working all the time. So she cut everything out of her budget, every creature comfort, everything she enjoyed about her life, she cut it out so that she could drop one of those part-time jobs. And then one morning, she woke up and she walked outside and her car was gone. And she called her insurance and they said they weren't going to cover the replacement value. So she had to take that job back because she simply cannot live her life without a car. Now you can bet your bottom dollar the guy who stole the car, he was probably out on bail. This was not his first job.
That's right.
Her taxes have gone up. Her heating bill has gone up. Her wages have not gone up. She's scared to go out in the streets in places where they didn't even lock the door not long ago. These are the people we're fighting for. These silly games over here, they're very entertaining. The soap opera that everyone sees with today, that's all fine. But there are real people whose lives are on the line here, and we have a duty to work for them. And quite frankly, this woman doesn't see me as any, or any of us as any kind of savior. They see us all as a last hope. In fact, she doesn't want to be saved. She just wants her life back.
Exactly.
She was taking care of herself just fine before her tax, her heat, her grocery bill went through the roof and her car went missing. She was doing just fine. She was doing everything right. Met another guy at the Le Brat Brewery a few days ago, and you can watch the video of me talking with him. He walked up to me and he said, "I have 3 jobs and I can't make it. We're renting. We have no hope. We've given up on ever owning a home. We're renting. We can barely make it." And he said to me, "I feel ashamed when I talk to my kids because they ask me why I'm never around and why we can never have a house. And I feel like a failure." But he didn't fail. He has been failed.
That's right.
He has been robbed of the promise of Canada. It was a very simple promise, that if you worked hard, you got a good life. Now, it wasn't fancy or extravagant, but you got a house with a yard where you could have kids playing safely, and you could have a nice dog that you could afford to feed along with the kids, and your kids could play safely in the streets. That was the promise. Now, politicians break promises all the time. But you know what was bad about this promise? This promise didn't belong to this Prime Minister. It wasn't his promise to break. It belonged to all of us. And our purpose is to bring home that promise for that young man, that young father, and that older female worker so that they can once again take back control of their lives, live in a safe country where their hard work earns them a good wage, where the rent and their food is affordable, and where, when they go to bed at night, They know that they will be safe throughout their sleep and that they will have their car in their driveway in the morning. A country where people are proud again to fly the flag, where they know the government is a servant and not a master, where they understand that every day the Commons, this place, works for the common people, not for the ego of one man desperate to cling on to his job. We must remember that we are servants in this place. We have a job to do on behalf of the people who sent us here. Our personal dramas are not important. The dramas that should seize all of our concern and imagination are the daily dramas of the working women and men that build this country. We are in it for them. We're going to give them back control of their lives in the freest country on earth, Canada. Let's bring it home.
Come on, get up, Lambert.
Avant qu'on passe aux questions et commentaires, conformément à l'article 38 du règlement, je dois faire connaître à la Chambre les questions qu'elle abordera à l'heure de l'ajournement ce soir. 1. La tarification du carbone pour l'honorable député de Bow River. Et 2. L'honorable député de Saint-Albert, Edmonton, sur les institutions démocratiques. So it is my duty, pursuant to Standing Order 38, to inform the House that questions to be raised tonight at the time of adjournment are as follows. The Honourable Member for Bow River on carbon pricing, and the Honourable Member for St. Albert, Edmonton on democratic institutions. I thank all members for their attention. Question et commentaire. The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Leader of the Government in the House of Commons.
Yes, thank you. Mr. Speaker, you know, there is no one more so than the Leader of the Conservative Party that both inside the House and outside the House tries to portray a false impression that Canada is broken, Mr. Speaker. The reality is Canada is the best country in the world to call home. We can do a worldwide tour where you will see that whether it's interest rates, whether it's inflation rates, that Canada is virtually second to no other G7 country. And when you think of things like foreign investment, we are third in the entire world in 2023, Mr. Speaker. To the Leader of the Conservative Party, Canada is not, in fact, broken. And I would remind him that he sat around a cabinet table with Stephen Harper, where Canadians sent a very resounding message back in 2015, where a third party took over as the government of the day because his government back then was such a disaster.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, everything is broken today. Absolutely everything. And 70% plus Canadians agree with me on that. The borders are broken. We have 500,000 people here illegally, according to the government's own documents. The immigration system is broken. We now have refugee camps, something we only used to see in third world countries that are being set up across our country in formerly tranquil and peaceful suburbs. Our drugs and disorder have broken our communities. We've lost more people to drug overdoses in the last 9 years than died fighting for Canada in the Second World War. Absolutely everything is broken after 9 years of this pathetic Prime Minister who's right now hiding under his desk.
Hear, hear.
The Honourable Member from Vancouver, Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, I agree with a lot of what my honourable colleague said in terms of his description of how difficult it is for many Canadians. I don't know that I would say everything's broken, but I'll tell you a lot of people are broke. A lot of families are struggling. 50% of Canadians living paycheck to paycheck. 1 out of 4 parents are skipping meals to feed their children. So my question is to my honourable colleague, the NDP proposed giving those people an immediate cut by permanently removing the GST off life's essentials like home heating, on all grocery items, on cellular and internet bills, on diapers. But he voted against that. So if he thinks everything's broken and he truly believes that people are struggling right now, why did he vote against the NDP motion that would have given people an immediate 5% break on life's essentials?
That's right.
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
I find it incredible that even when there is no Liberal minister willing to defend the temporary 2-month GST tax trick, the NDP is there to defend it for them.
Yeah.
Here we have a tax trick that will cost more to administer than it will save anybody, that many vendors are not even implementing, and that will be gone before it starts. And you have the NDP talking, but this is the NDP. That member has
Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member from Vancouver Kingsway, who had the opportunity to ask a question, to please hold the microphone, hold his place until he's recognized by the Speaker again to speak. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
The member wants me to tell the truth about the permanent tax change. Well, there is a permanent tax change he has supported, which is to jack up the carbon tax on absolutely everything. He's voted to quadruple that tax to a eye-watering 61 cents a litre that would literally grind our economy to a halt. It would take food off grocery shelves. It would take parts out of factories. It would shut down the farm vehicles that bring us our food. It would be a nuclear winter if that tax increase that he has voted to legislate into place ever happens, and that's why we need a carbon tax election so that I can axe the tax.
Question et commentaire. The honourable member from Saanich Gulf Islands.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's so rare that the Speaker's rounds get around to Green Party to put a question to the Leader of the Official Opposition. So I want to have this opportunity. I want to start by saying there was nothing in his statement with which I could disagree, because it vaulted us into a frenzy of patriotism. I love this country. There's no place in the world I would rather live than being Canadian. But the Honourable Leader of the Official Opposition also maybe gave us a chance to get to know him a bit better. What would he do instead? He mentioned he'd met a waitress. He's known me a long time. I was a waitress. I waitressed for more than a decade, couldn't afford to go to university, but only in Canada was it possible that for me to go to law school as a mature student. I want to ask the honourable member, since I didn't join a political party until I was over 50, what jobs has he held in real life outside of politics that make him think he could be Prime Minister?
Order. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
I'd be happy to talk about the jobs, Mr. Speaker. My first job in here was to help pass the Federal Accountability Act to crack down on the corruption that we've seen on the liberal side. Then I helped cut the GST so that Canadians could save when they made every single consumer purchase, 7 to 6 to 5%. Then I worked with Prime Minister Harper to help balance the budget and to rebuild the military so that we would have necessary equipment to help destroy Al-Qaeda after the attacks of 9/11. Helped deliver the lowest inflation of any government in 40 years, leaving behind a balanced budget and the best balance sheet of any government in the G7. In fact, it turns out the job experience I have is best aligned with the job that I promised to do. Now let's bring it home.
Questions and comments. Question et commentaire. The honourable member from Leeds, Grenville, Thousand Islands and Rideau Lakes.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. And of course, the words of the Leader of the Official Opposition do bring great hope to Canadians at a time when they need it most. This government had committed, this Liberal Prime Minister committed to a $40 billion, a massive $40 billion deficit as the guardrail. Now, of course, that's an irresponsible number at $40 billion, but that's what their promise was. And they smashed through it. And who are the they? It's that NDP Liberal Prime Minister and Carbon Tax Carney, his real economic advisor. And they tried to pin this massive failure on their finance minister. Now, she declared that she didn't have confidence in the Prime Minister and that she wouldn't support him. So my question to the Leader of the Official Opposition, and I know that he'll have some very insightful wisdom for Canadians, is what can Canadians look forward to that a common sense Conservative government would do to restore fiscal sanity and clean up this $62 billion mess that Prime Minister has created?
The Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
$62 billion mess. That is such a tough question. I almost didn't want to stand up and answer it for a second there. But it is a big mess. It is an incredible mess that this Prime Minister will leave behind when he takes run, and I understand that might happen any minute. As Carbon Tax Carney is lining up, you almost wonder if Carbon Tax Carney planned it all this way. Right. You know, he's the top economic advisor. He pushed all of these extra spending measures on the finance minister, and then she objected to the crazy $62 billion deficit. She's out now. The Prime Minister might soon be out. And who will walk up? Well, Carbon Tax Carney, taking the wheel of the bus after he helped crash it, Mr. Speaker. But he's not the only one. There's also the getaway car. Who's been driving the getaway car? The NDP. The NDP leader. Today he said that the Prime Minister should resign. And yet, just days ago, he voted to keep the Prime Minister exactly where he is. So it is time for the NDP leader to state clearly that he has not only lost confidence in the Prime Minister, but he is prepared to vote non-confidence or take any other legal steps necessary to express non-confidence in this Prime Minister in order to trigger a carbon tax election as soon as possible.